He left me a key. Not to the house. Not to his car. Not to anything that made sense at the time. Just a small brass key on a post-it note that said drawer. Bottom. Left. I found it tucked inside the sympathy card my uncle handed me at my father's funeral reception. Slipped between the envelope flap and the seal like he'd been holding it for a long time. Waiting for exactly the right moment. I didn't think much of it then. I was standing in the living room of the house I grew up in, the same house in Oakville, Ontario, where my father had built his accounting firm from a spare bedroom into a 6-person office, and I was holding a paper plate with a sandwich I hadn't touched. Nodding at people whose names I couldn't remember, while my Uncle Derek circled the room like he owned it. He didn't own it. Not yet. My father, Gerald, passed on a Tuesday in late November. He was 61 years old, which everyone at the reception kept saying was too young. As if there's an age at which losing your father stops being devastating. He had a stroke. No warning. No slow decline I could have prepared for. One day he was calling me to ask if I wanted to come for Sunday dinner. And 4 days later, I was choosing between 2 caskets at a funeral home in Burlington, while my uncle stood behind me saying he was there for whatever I needed. I'm Maya. I'm 30 years old. I'm a CPA certified public accountant working for a mid-size firm in downtown Toronto, which means I understand numbers, documentation, and the very specific ways that people use paperwork to steal from other people. I say this not to brag. I say this because it matters later. My Uncle Derek is my father's younger brother by 9 years. He's 62 now, semi-retired, and spent 25 years as a corporate lawyer before his license was suspended, for reasons my father never fully explained to me, only saying once. Quietly. Over the phone. Derek has always wanted more than he earned. Maya. Remember that. I remembered it. I just didn't know how much I would need to. My father never remarried after my mother left when I was 7. It was just the 2 of us in that Oakville house for most of my life. And when I moved to Toronto at 23 for work, he kept the house exactly as it was. Same furniture. Same blue curtains in the kitchen. Same magnetic photo strip on the fridge from a photo booth at the CNE when I was 9 years old. He said he wasn't sentimental, but the photo stayed on that fridge for 21 years. So I'm not sure I believed him. The accounting firm, Harlow Financial Services, operated out of a commercial unit in Oakville he'd owned outright since 2009. 4 full-time staff. A roster of small business clients. Modest but stable. Worth somewhere between $400. 000 and $600. 000, depending on who you asked. When I was growing up, my father would say, "This firm is your inheritance." Maya. Not money, a foundation. Derek knew that. Derek had always known that. At the reception, I noticed him talking to my father's office manager, Brenda, in the corner near the coat closet. They weren't laughing. They were leaning in. I saw Derek take out his phone and show her something on the screen. Brenda nodded slowly. In the way you nod when someone is telling you something you're not sure you should agree to. I almost walked over. Instead, I went to refill my water glass. And by the time I looked back, they had separated 2 days after the funeral. Derek called me. He said he wanted to talk about the transition. I asked what transition. He said, "Well, the firm. Maya. Someone has to manage operations while the estate is being settled. Your father would have wanted continuity for his clients and his staff. He wasn't wrong about that. My father absolutely would have wanted that. I've already spoken to Brenda," Derek said. "She agrees someone with a legal and business background should oversee things temporarily. I was thinking I could step in as interim manager, just to keep things stable, just until probate clears." I told him I would think about it. I called my father's estate lawyer the next morning. Her name is Catherine, and she's been handling my father's legal affairs for over a decade. I asked her where things stood. She told me the will had already been filed for probate with the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, that the process typically takes 4 to 7 months. and that until then, the estate's assets, including the firm, were frozen under estate administration. No one should be managing or making decisions about the firm's assets right now. She said, not without formal court approval or letters probate. I told her about Derek's call. There was a pause on the line. Maya, she said, has anyone asked you to sign anything? Not yet. I told her. Not yet. Derek called again that Friday. He said he'd taken the liberty of drafting a temporary operational oversight agreement, his words that would allow him to manage the firm's day-to-day finances and client relationships while probate was pending. He said it was standard practice. He said it was what any responsible family would do. He said my father had mentioned to him, casually, that he'd always hoped Derek would be more involved in the business. I said I'd look at the document. He emailed it that evening. I opened it at my kitchen table in Toronto, poured myself a coffee, and read it 3 times. It was not a temporary operational oversight agreement. It was a limited power of attorney broad enough to authorize Derek to make financial decisions on behalf of the estate, transfer funds between accounts, enter contracts on behalf of Harlow Financial Services, and negotiate asset sales, valid for 12 months, automatically renewable. The firm's commercial property was listed as a transferable asset. My hand was completely steady when I set down my mug. I didn't call Derek back. I called Catherine instead. She went quiet for a long moment after I read her the key clauses. Don't sign it, she said. Don't respond to Derek at all. And, Maya, I need you to go to your father's house and check the bottom left drawer of his desk. Gerald left something for you there. He told me about it 6 months ago. He said if anything ever happened to him suddenly, you'd know where to look. I drove to Oakville that Saturday morning. The house still smelled like him coffee and cedar and something I'll never be able to name. I went straight to his office. The small room off the hallway he'd converted from a storage closet years ago. The desk was an old oak one he'd had since before I was born. 3 drawers on the left side. Bottom drawer. The brass key fit. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting. And beneath it, a manila folder. I sat down on the floor of his office and opened the letter first. It was 4 pages. He must have written it over a long time, because the handwriting changed slightly between pages. The way handwriting does when you come back to something weeks later. He talked about the firm. He talked about the clients he cared about most. He talked about Brenda and how she'd been with him for 14 years, and how I should trust her judgment even when it was hard to hear. And then he talked about Derek. My father said he had reason to believe Derek had been attempting to position himself as a beneficiary in conversations with their mother's estate lawyer years before she passed. He said Derek had once, when they were both younger, borrowed money from a business partner and never repaid it, which contributed to the license suspension I'd never been fully told about. He said, I love my brother. I also know exactly what he is. If I've left you this letter, it's because something happened before I could tell you in person. Do not let him near the firm. Everything you need to protect it is in the folder. I opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the official will. I already had one from Catherine. But this copy had a handwritten note clipped to it that said original filed March 2024, duplicate for Maya's copy. Beneath it was a printed letter on Harlow Financial Services letterhead, dated 8 months before my father's death. Signed by both my father and Catherine, designating me as sole beneficiary and successor owner of the firm and its associated commercial property, and beneath that was a printed email exchange between Derek and a commercial real estate broker in Mississauga, dated 4 months prior. The emails discussed the Harlow Financial Services commercial unit. The broker had provided a market valuation, $810. Ling ling ling. Derek had responded, once I have operational authority, we can move quickly. Target timeline 60 days post-event. Post-event. That was what he called my father's death. A post-event timeline. I sat on that floor for a while. I'm not sure how long. The afternoon light moved across the room, and I just sat there and let the full shape of it settle into me. The preparation, the patience, The calls to Brenda. The drafted power of attorney waiting in my inbox. He had been ready. He had been ready before my father was even gone. I called Catherine on Monday and read her the email exchange. Okay, she said. And I could hear her writing something. Okay. This changes things significantly. She filed an urgent notice with the court flagging potential interference with estate administration. She sent a formal cease and desist to Derek's last known legal address, informing him that I had retained counsel and that any further attempts to access estate assets or solicit signatures would be treated as a violation of the Estates Administration Act. She contacted the Law Society of Ontario, the governing body for lawyers in the province, to report the power of attorney document he'd sent me as a potential unauthorized practice issue. Given that his license had been suspended, I did not tell Derek any of this. He called me twice that week. I let both calls go to voicemail. He left cheerful messages, the kind of cheerful that has effort in it, asking if I'd had a chance to review the document, saying the staff at the firm were concerned about stability, saying he'd spoken to two of my father's clients who were asking questions. I forwarded both voicemails to Catherine. The third week after my father's death, Derek escalated. He drove to the firm's office in Oakville. I know this because Brenda called me, flustered and apologetic, saying my uncle had come in and presented what he claimed was a letter of authorization from the estate. He told the staff he was assuming temporary management and asked Brenda to hand over the client files and the access credentials for the firm's accounting software. Brenda had stalled him. She'd asked to make a copy of the letter for her records. While the copier was running, she stepped into the back room and called me. Maya? It doesn't look right, she said, her voice low. The letterhead looks like your dad's, but the signature I've typed under your father's signature for 14 years, that's not his signature. I told her to make the copy. I told her to be polite and give him nothing else. I told her I was calling Catherine, and she would hear from us by end of day. I called Catherine. Catherine called the Ontario Provincial Police Estate Fraud Unit. And then Catherine called me back and told me something I hadn't known. The letter he presented, she said, has your father's letterhead and a notarization stamp. The notary stamp is real, but the notary in question retired in 2021. Her stamp was reported stolen from her office in 2022. This is document fraud. Maya, this isn't a civil matter anymore. The thing about spending 3 weeks watching someone walk toward a wall they don't know is that you learn a particular kind of stillness. I wasn't angry. Exactly. I was something quieter than anger. Something with more patience in it. The OPP fraud unit opened a file. Catherine coordinated with them directly. I was asked to provide the email exchange from the folder, both voicemails, and a written account of every interaction since the funeral. I wrote it all down. Every date. Every word I could remember. Every call. I want to pause here for a moment, because this is the part that matters most. And I think it gets lost in stories like this. My father kept records. He kept that folder. He wrote that letter. He filed the duplicate will copy. He knew, not in a paranoid way, but in the quiet, careful way that people who have lived with difficult family members learn to know things that documentation was the only language that couldn't be argued with later. He wasn't preparing for a fight. He was making sure I would never have to fight alone. That is the lesson I carry from all of this. More than anything else, keep records. Date everything. Keep copies somewhere only you can access. Not because you expect betrayal, but because love, sometimes, looks like paperwork. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the Brampton courthouse. A procedural matter related to the estate freeze and the fraud investigation. Catherine told me I didn't need to be there. It was administrative. Mostly lawyers and documentation. I went anyway. I arrived early enough to find a seat in the public gallery. Derek arrived 20 minutes later with a lawyer I didn't recognize, young, uncomfortable looking, carrying a leather portfolio that seemed slightly too large for what he was doing with it. Derek was wearing a dark blazer. He looked composed. He looked like a man who believed he was about to receive good news. He hadn't seen me yet. The judge reviewed the estate freeze application and the fraud unit's preliminary findings. Catherine presented the email exchange, the voicemails, the falsified letter, the stolen notary stamp documentation, and the timeline. Derek's lawyer objected twice. The judge overruled him both times without looking up from the documents. Then Derek looked up, and he saw me. I was sitting in the third row of the public gallery with my hands folded in my lap. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't doing anything. I was just there. The way my father would have been, steady, documented, and 3 steps ahead. His face went through several things very quickly. The judge confirmed the estate freeze would remain in place. The falsified authorization letter was entered into evidence. The Law Society was notified formally of record. The fraud unit's investigation was ongoing, with Derek named as the subject. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something. Derek didn't respond. He was still looking at me. On the way out of the courthouse, he tried to stop me in the hallway. He said my name. I kept walking. Catherine was beside me, and she put her hand briefly on my arm, not pulling me. In just present, and we walked out through the front doors into the cold November air. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment and breathed. 3 months later, Derek was formally charged under Section 380 of the Criminal Code of Canada, fraud over $5. Ling ling ling. The Crown prosecutor cited the falsified authorization document, the misuse of the stolen notary stamp, and the documented email exchange with the Mississauga broker as evidence of premeditated intent to defraud the estate. The commercial real estate transaction he had been attempting to arrange was valued at $810. Ling ling ling. He did not get that money. What he got was a criminal record, a formal referral to the Law Society for reinvestigation of his original license suspension, and a civil recovery action filed by the estate for legal costs and damages. Brenda still runs the day-to-day operations at Harlow Financial Services. I am now listed as the firm's owner of record. The commercial property is in my name. 2 of my father's longest-standing clients sent me cards when the probate cleared one of them. A restaurant owner in Oakville who'd been with my father for 19 years wrote, "Your dad always said you were the careful one." He was right. I have that card on my fridge. It's next to the photo booth strip from the CNE. Me and my father, 2003, making faces at the camera in that cramped little booth, not knowing what was ahead of us, not needing to. I'm telling you this story because I know there are people watching this who are in the middle of something like it right now. Maybe it's a parent. Maybe it's a sibling. Maybe it's someone who showed up at the exact moment you were most vulnerable and offered to help. And maybe you're sitting with a document in your inbox that doesn't feel right, and someone is telling you it's standard. It's temporary. It's what any responsible family would do. Here is what I want you to know. Read everything before you sign anything. Find an independent lawyer, not one referred to you by the person asking you to sign. If something has been described to you as temporary or just a formality, have a lawyer confirm that in writing. In Ontario, if you suspect estate fraud, you can contact the Ministry of the Attorney General or call the estate's office directly. You do not need to be a lawyer to protect yourself. You need to be documented. My father left me a key. He left me a folder. He left me a letter that told me exactly who to trust and who to watch. He left me prepared. That was the greatest thing he ever gave me. Not the firm. Not the property. Not any of it. The fact that he thought ahead. The fact that he loved me carefully enough to make sure I wouldn't be alone when it mattered. I didn't scream in that courtroom. I didn't have to.